Hello, friends. Today we're going to study about the poem Not Waving but Drowning by Steve Smith. It's an IGCSE curriculum poem. So let's start with the introduction first. Not Waving but Drowning is a poem by Steve Smith and was first published as a part of a collection with the same title in 1957. The poem has been linked to Smith's personal life, with the account interpreted as a struggle with psychological issues. The poem is told in both first person and third person perspectives and tells of a drowning man signaling for help but is mistaken for waving. Though the subject matter is dark in nature, it has a humorous tone conveyed in a deadpan style. The first person speaker, most likely the dead man, interposes between the narrations to highlight his predicament. The apparent theme conveyed in the poem is the failure of communication and misapprehension. The drowning man is known for his larking, therefore, the crowd misinterprets his call for help, which leads them to his demise. The extended metaphor in the poem is a struggle with mental illness and a sense of loneliness. Smith struggled with psychological problems that often go unnoticed by others but overwhelming for the sufferer. Now we have about the poet Steve Smith. Stevie Smith was born on 20th September 1902, Hull, Yorkshire, England, and died on March 7, 1971, London. So she was a British poet who expressed an original and visionary personality in her work, combining a lively with penetrating honesty and an absence of sentiment. For most of her life, Smith lived with an aunt in the same house in Palmer's Green, a northern London suburb. After attending school there, she worked until the early 1950s as a secretary in the London offices of a magazine publisher. She then lived and worked at home, caring for her elderly aunt who had raised her and who died at age 96 in 1968. Palmer's Green and the people there are subjects for some of her poetry. In the 1960s, Smith's poetry readings became popular and she made radio broadcasts and recordings. She also wrote three novels as well as short stories, literary reviews, and essays, but she is remembered chiefly for her poetry. The collected poems of Steve Smith, illustrated with her Thurber-like sketches, includes her first book of poems, A Good Time Was Had by All, 1937, and Not Waving But Drowning, 1957. The title poem of which appears in many anthologies. The lines of her verse are often short and telling. They slip in and out of meter and rest on accents and broken rhyme in ways that arrest attention. She addresses serious themes with the clarity critics often call childlike. The theme of death recurs often. Me Again, Uncollected Writings of Steve Smith, illustrated by herself 1981, is a posthumous compilation of her prose writings, letters, and previously uncollected poetry. Now, the poem's main ideas and themes. Not Weaving but Drowning by Steve Smith explores themes of miscommunication, loneliness, isolation, and death. The poem presents the story of a man who appears to be drowning, but others perceive him as merely waving. This misunderstanding, this misunderstanding reflects deeper issues of loneliness and the inability to communicate one's true feelings and struggles. This poem highlights the disconnect between appearances and reality, emphasizing the importance of genuine understanding and empathy in human relationships. Additionally, it suggests the consequences of ignoring or misinterpreting the signals of distress from those around us. Now, the poem analysis, stanza 1. Nobody heard him, the dead man, but still he lay moaning. I was much further out than you thought, and not waving but drowning. The first stanza introduces a central conflict of the poem. The man who appears to be waving is actually drowning. The repetition of not waving but drowning emphasizes the misunderstanding and the dire situation of the man. The imagery of the dead man and his mowing creates a sense of despair and isolation. Despite his cries for help, nobody hears or understands him. The sea metaphor symbolizes the overwhelming struggles and challenges faced by the man. It represents vastness of his emotional turmoil and the sense of being engulfed by his problem. The significance of the sea metaphor lies in his portrayal of the man's internal struggles and his inability to communicate his distress effectively to those around them. It highlights the theme of miscommunication and the consequences of overlooking the true depth of someone's suffering. Now, the stanza 2. Poor chap, he always loved larking, and now he's dead. It must have been too cold for him. His heart gave it, they said. They knew him and they knew him long enough to know his tendency toward larking. That's their half assed eulogy. Who wants to imagine the 6 word summation of his own character? It's almost worse than imagining death itself, right? And poor chap, oof, we are not allowed to be haunted by the dead man's testimony for too long before the glyph epithet snaps us back to the social occasion. The third line tumbles out fast in monosyllables, like the murmuring of a crowd, prancing around the edges of a corniness. The irony is pure Stevie. They were cold for him. His heart broke under the strain of being misunderstood for so long, he wants to tell us. Now the stanza 3. Oh, no, no, no. It was too cold always. Still the dead one lay moaning. I was much too far out all my life, and not waving but drowning. Language failed him, salutations failed him. We are all odd birds, all in danger of having our gestures, habits, and roles misread, mistaken for our substance. At work, whose scholar doesn't chaff, I guess I'd argue that it's breeziness on our part when we sum up a minor poet like Smith as mannered, precious, or quirky, not that, not that those terms aren't useful. There's a pleasure in being held at arm's length, in being dared to embrace and to dismiss a poet mannerisms. The human creature is alone in his carapace, split throat. Poetry is a strong way out. The passage that poetry blasts is often in its splinters, covered with blood, but she can come out softly. Now comes the main themes. Not Waving but Drowning by Steve Smith is a powerful and poignant poem that explores several themes, including miscommunication. The poem emphasizes the dangers of miscommunication and the importance of paying attention to the signs of distress in others. The victim's attempts to signal for help was misinterpreted as a friendly gesture leading to a tragic outcome. The poem underscores the importance of being attentive and responsive to the needs of others, particularly in situations where their safety and well being are at risk. Loneliness, the poem highlights the theme of loneliness and the dangers of being disconnected from others. The drowning man's inner experience was not reflected in his outward appearance, which created a sense of disconnection and isolation. The poem underscores the importance of building relationships and connection with others and the dangers of assuming that everything is fine based upon superficial appearances. Isolation. The poem explores the theme of isolation and the dangers of being a solitary figure. The drowning man was dancing at the end of the pyre, which suggests that he was a solitary figure who was struggling to connect with others. The poem underscores the importance of reaching out to those who may be struggling and the dangers of assuming that everything is fine based on outward appearances. Death. The poem also explores the theme of death and tragic consequences of misunderstood communication. The drowning man attempts to signal for help were not recognized, which led to his death. The poem underscores the importance of being attentive and responsive to the needs of others, particularly in situations where their safety and well being are at risk. Overall, Not Waving but Drowning is a powerful and poignant poem that explores the themes of miscommunication, loneliness, isolation, and death. Alright? Now, the poem also highlights the tragic consequences of misunderstood communications and the importance of being attentive and responding and responsive to the needs of others. Now, we have some questions. How does the title Not Waving but Drowning reflect the poem's themes? What do you think the speaker is trying to convey about communication and loneliness? How does the poem's structure contribute to his meaning? Can you try these questions? Well, let's read the answers now. The title, Not Waving but Drowning, particular perfectly encapsulates the poem's themes of misunderstanding, loneliness, and the difficulty of communicating one's inner feelings. The title highlights differences between waving, a sign of help or acknowledgement, and drowning, a sign of distress that may not be recognized. This contrast underscores the idea that the speaker cries for help are going unnoticed or misunderstood, and that their attempts to communicate their distress are being misinterpreted as something else. The speaker in the poem is trying to convey the idea that loneliness and emotional distress can be isolating and difficult to communicate. The speaker, their own drowning, is a metaphor for their emotional struggles, emphasizing the idea that they're metaphorically drowning in their own emotions, feelings, and thoughts. The poem's central irony that the speaker's cries for help go unheeded even as they're literally drowning underscores the disconnect between the speaker's inner turmoil and the world around them. The poem's structure contributes to its meaning by emphasizing the speaker's isolation and loneliness. The poem is written in free verse with no consistent rhyme or meter, which creates a sense of disjointedness and disorientation. The poem's short lines and spare use of punctuation also contribute to this sense of fragmentation, emphasizing the idea that speaker thoughts and feelings are disconnected and incomplete. The poem's use of repetition, particularly the phrase, nobody heard him, the dead man, further underscores the idea that the speaker cries for help are going unheeded and their attempts to communicate their distress are being ignored. Overall, the poem structures reinforces its themes of misunderstanding, loneliness, and the difficulty of communicating one's inner feelings, creating a powerful, emotionally resonant work of literature. That's all for this poem, child. Now we have come to the end. I hope you liked the poem. Please let me know if you have any doubts. I'm also giving online tutoring services, so you can contact me for that. Thank you.